Good afternoon. We are doing it live right here on 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KBC.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks ending the day mixed today. Gold closing at a record high. Silver also getting a pop. Bitcoin edging higher. The price of gold shining today, hitting a record high close of $2,798. On the latest reports on the economy here, indicating the economy is slowing, warranting the Fed to possibly lower interest rates despite holding them steady at the meeting we just wrapped up yesterday with Fed Chairman Jerome Powell commenting on inflation, jobs, and the economy. Treasury yields did edge lower today as traders grew disappointed, it seems, following the latest reading of the gross domestic product, the broadest reading on the U.S. economy, which turns out did expand, but at a lower rate than expected, dipping from 3.1% in the third quarter of last year to 2.3%, and that came up short of analyst expectations. We also got another reading on jobless claims over the past week, coming in lower than expected at 220,000, falling to 207K. Stocks did close higher today, despite the brief late-session pullback. Investors waiting for President Trump to potentially deliver a more detailed announcement on what he plans to do with tariffs. The Dow coming in for a closing gain today of 169 points, settling at 44,882. Looks like we're just shy of the record high close we hit last month. The S&P 500 gained 32 points, and the NASDAQ added just about 50 points. Shares of mega cap tech companies still mixed for the week. We did see NVIDIA, which has had a rough week on this DeepSeek news, rebounding slightly today, only slightly, up $1 at just about $1 at 124 and change. Tesla, IBM, and Meta helping lead most of the stocks higher today among the names in the earnings parade. Focus also on more tech earnings this afternoon with Apple in focus. Apple overall revenue rose by 4%, but it missed Wall Street analyst iPhone sales expectations and saw sales in China decline 11.1%. Apple stock had closed down about $2. It's up about $7 in after-hours trading. The NASDAQ briefly turned negative heading into the closing bell as investors reacted to comments from President Trump about him potentially making a decision soon to apply tariffs on Canada and Mexico starting February 1st. That's this weekend. President Trump offering new comments about his threat to hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs, and we could get some further details later this evening. The price of oil finishing a bit higher today after we saw the lowest settlement of 2025. Right now, crude oil hovering just above $73 a barrel. California regulators say Tesla has yet to apply for the needed permits to operate a commercial robo-taxi service. This after Elon Musk said Tesla planned to do so in California this year. We'll take a look at that story and more coming up with Lauren Fix later this hour, our go-to car expert. Also, will low-income housing be part of the rebuilding of the Pacific Palisades following the horrific firestorms? We're told now that a law on the books in L.A. specifies low-income housing part of the equation. Jerry Sullivan at the Real Deal Commercial Real Estate News Source will be joining me live later this hour to discuss that. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, the price of gold at a record high, and the whole works now. Joining us live, AXEL MERK, President and Chief Investment Officer of MERK Investments, which includes the VanEck MERK Gold ETF. AXEL, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
We've got 7 hours to talk about things, I think, here. Lots of things.
Yes.
Where do you want
yes,
to start?
sir. Big. Let's get started with the big news here. You're also an economist, it should be noted, and also author of Sustainable Wealth. And want to get your views on the big picture here. First of all, Axel, with the Fed decision yesterday, the Fed holding the line on short-term rates with inflation still a concern, nervousness on the job front as well. Looks like the Europeans lowered their rates as well this week, and other places did too, and the price of gold suddenly at an all-time high. Give us your reaction to all this big news this week.
Well, the Fed tried to say nothing. Indeed, I don't understand why they hold these press conferences if there's only things they can lose. Powell tried to be humble, saying, we don't quite know what inflation is going to do. We think it's on the right path. Rightfully so, because once inflation is no longer linear on the way down, I mentioned that in the context of the ECB press conference today, where Madame Lagarde, the head of the ECB, was adamant that she knows exactly where inflation is going to be, and that's why she can lower rates. And of course, one of the things we don't know, you talked about the tariff and all that, what's going to happen here with the markets, but the market, at least the gold market, took it positively. I think part of it is that we have a better idea about the administration policies. Not that we know which tariff is going to be imposed and what date, but I think the market is getting to know the how Trump operates, and I think that may well be reflected in the price of gold. But overall, central banks tried not to do too much this week, and we live another day, and the price of gold is higher.
This at a time when the dollar is still pretty strong, although it has slipped recently against other major currencies. You're also a currency expert. And what about the dollar in all this? And it is quite remarkable that gold, just at a time where we're told inflation is supposedly easing and the dollar is strong, that gold will be hitting record highs here.
Yeah, and on top of that, we have Chinese New Year, and the Chinese are said to be buying a lot of gold. They're not in the market right now because they're shut down for the extended holiday. After the announcement today, the Canadian dollar and the Mexican peso weakened in reaction to those the tariff announcements. Not all that surprising that happened, but gold didn't blink, so to speak, and had a tiny bit, came down a little bit, and is back up since. The yen has been strengthened a little bit. The Japanese raised interest rates, and indeed in Japan, inflation is higher. It's just that the debt level is so high that they can't really afford, on the government side, much higher rates. A quote-unquote fun fact that went around our office today, because people say, oh my God, the higher price of these tariffs are bad for Canada. But as a gold investor, if the Canadian dollar weakens, the labor input to get gold out of the ground in Canada goes down, and the price of gold in Canadian dollars is higher. So the margins actually go up for gold mining companies in Canada. And not that most people care about that particular space, but that's something that's close to our space.
Should be noted, looks like we're at $1. The Canadian dollar is at $1.45 versus the U.S. dollar, and we're at $20.68 versus the Mexican peso. I'm sure we're going to be hearing those currencies quoted more often now with President Trump possibly going into detail about tariffs possibly this evening. But it looks like you're right. The tariff news and his comments today at the White House also appears to have impacted the price of gold as well as the currency markets. At this point, what's the outlook on the price of gold? You're hovering just below $3,000 an ounce at the moment.
Well, I'm always reluctant to make a forecast because once the price of gold starts moving, you can have other people jump in, and if you set a target, it will easily blast through that. I am a long-term investor in gold. I try not to pay attention too much to the daily moves. I think one of the reasons why the price of gold is high, if you just look at what's been happening in the administration, there have been some courts that have been blocking some of the initiatives. And so the assumption is presumably that some of the things that might hurt growth by cutting, quote unquote, too much, that might be stopped. But at the other end of the spectrum, to the extent that Trump wants to get things done, he'll probably have to work with politicians. And the net result of that is more spending and more deficits. And as much as we put an emphasis on this government efficiency department, entitlement reform or anything like that is not on the table. In order to get tax reform done, it's likely going to be giving gifts to everybody. And so I think that is part of what the price of gold is reacting to, that while the economy is in an okay space, what's going to happen going forward is that we're going to continue to have quite a fiscal stimulus in the system, even if that's not the intent, that's the practical thing. And even these tariffs, right? I mean, part of the tariffs, I think, is because of fentanyl that's produced in Canada, and surprise, there are initiatives in Canada to start fighting fentanyl more. And so we don't know whether these tariffs are going to be in place for 4 years or for 4 minutes, right? So it's a negotiating tool. And I think that is part of what the market is looking at.
Right, and then also tariffs will most likely be imposed on China as well. We're awaiting some further announcement, possibly this evening. And I'm remiss in wishing you a happy Year of the Snake here, Axel. It is the new Lunar New Year, as you noted, and the Chinese markets were closed for that reason, as well as other markets in Asia. And zooming out to the bigger picture here now on the economy, we did get that statement on the economy, as well as the decision on interest rates, where we heard the Fed chairman and company hold the line on short-term rates following that two-day meeting. I'm sure you had a chance to go through all of that. Any surprises there, and any signs here of what we can expect on the inflation front and for the economy here in this still relatively new year 2025?
I think we need to keep in mind that the real economy and the financial markets are not always in sync. When you look at the financial markets, I would think many people agree that there's concentration in a few stocks. They might be vulnerable. At least recent volatility has suggested that. On the economy side of things, you mentioned earlier that GDP numbers were a tad weaker than expected, but overall, the economy appears to be holding together. The Federal Reserve has a slight, quote-unquote, tightening bias, which means the economy might continue to slow down. Countering that is, of course, that the various initiatives of the Trump administration are likely to ease regulatory burden. The quote-unquote animal spirits are released. And even though I was just skeptical about how much Trump might get done, the perception matters when, especially when it comes to consumer confidence. Republicans in particular, they are very depressed when a Democrat is in power. They are euphoric when a Republican is in power. That makes a difference. And so that will be a tailwind to the economy. So I wouldn't be surprised if the economy is going to be just fine in the coming months. At the same time, I'm much more cautious on financial markets themselves. With regard to inflation, I do think that nobody knows, notably the Federal Reserve doesn't know. And because I allege the Federal Reserve doesn't really have a model, and we saw that in December in particular, when they just let their emotions go wild based on the election of President Trump, that they will be looking at everything with hindsight. That itself is not a very productive way of conducting monetary policy, but I don't think much is going to happen. But they are petrified that they're going to lower rates too much. So they'll keep rates about where they are, maybe lower them a little bit later this year. And for better and worse, and I think for better, the Federal Reserve is probably not the most important thing that the markets will be glued on.
Added to the mix, cryptos these days, and a pro-crypto president in office, as well as other administration folks who are pro-crypto. We've been having conversations about crypto since the dawn of the Bitcoin era. So I know you follow what's going on. We, by the way, speak to the biggest fans of crypto here, as well as the harshest critics. We did see Bitcoin dip earlier this week on that DeepSeek news that came out of China over the weekend. And gosh, every day seems like a month nowadays. But yeah, it was just this week that happened. And we saw Bitcoin plunge into the 97,000 range. Today it's up around 105,000. What are your thoughts about cryptos in the mix, and your thoughts about Bitcoin and the other cryptos here?
Well, first on the news side, Madame Lagarde at the ECB was asked today whether the ECB might consider putting Bitcoin as a reserve at the ECB, and of course it would be the member countries, and she poured cold water onto that. She talked about the safety and other things, but most notably, she referred to anti-money laundering concerns. And while there are plenty in the crypto crowd that would say that those can be fixed, the attitude at the ECB is not to allow member countries to do that. In the U.S., of course, we've seen, as you pointed out, right, a lot of things in the election that's very favorable to it. I think the biggest positive here is that we might finally develop a friendly regulatory environment. And that doesn't mean that Bitcoin is going to go up and down, but it means that a lot of technologies can be developed based on this decentralized ledger. And there is amazing talent. And I think that is also why Trump is supporting it. I mean, of course, Trump has issued his own coin now, But I think he says this is a new industry. We must have that industry in the U.S. With regard to having Bitcoin as a reserve currency, I think that's complete nonsense, but not for the reasons that Lagarde is mentioning. I just don't think there's any need for that. It's really mostly to throw red meat at the supporters. So I'm very much in support of that industry being fostered. I do not make a prediction on the price of Bitcoin. I don't think that anybody has figured out what exactly the dynamics are. I tend to say it still wants to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up. Sometimes it trades with risk assets. Sometimes it trades more defensively. And so it is highly speculative. So I would caution about that. But I think the technology itself will get much more attention, and there will be many, many more products that will be developed, not just abilities to bet on some meme coin.
Axel, thank you very much for that thorough analysis. As always, I wish we had more time, but we'll have to stop there. That is Axel MERK, the President and Chief Investment Officer of MERK Investments, which includes the VanEck MERK Gold ETF, with the price of gold hitting a record high today. Axel, thank you very much for coming to the line on this big day, and look forward to speaking with you again very, very soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. And out to the freeways we go now on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Good afternoon. Stocks ending the day mixed. The big story, gold at a record high, closing at $2,798 an ounce. Looks like it's above $2,800 an ounce now here in after hours trading, up more than $11 at, according to the COMEX quote here, gold futures at $2,834.40 an ounce here at the moment, kissing record highs. This as the price of silver has also moved up, still well off its all-time high, but highs we've seen in quite a while, of 27 cents right now at $32.76 an ounce. Price of gold moving higher. This as the European Central Bank, as you heard here, cut their interest rates. The Federal Reserve here on this side of the pond held steady on benchmark interest rates yesterday. Treasury bond yields did edge lower today on the latest reading on the economy here in the U.S., showing that although expanding, the economy did so at a lower rate than analysts had expected, dipping from 3.1% in the third quarter of last year to 2.3% in the fourth quarter of 2024. Initial jobless claims this past week fell to 207,000, coming in lower than the expected 220,000, and also the previous week's 223,000. The Dow coming in for a closing loss today. Is that right? Did it come in for a closing loss? Let me just double check that here. We want to make sure we have the right information for you here. I know the NASDAQ did move up 49 points. The Dow added, yes, up 169 points to 44,882, and it is just shy of its all-time high, which we saw back on December 4th. The S&P 500 up 32 points at 6,071. The NASDAQ, which has had a rough week with that big plunge of more than 600 points earlier this week on the DeepSeek news, rebounding a bit more today up 49 points at 19,682. The volatility index pulling back 4% today. NVIDIA, which took a big hit this week, rebounding slightly today up 95 cents at 124.65. Tesla, with its earnings news, moving higher up $11 and change to $400.28 a share. Meta, on its earnings report, up nearly $11 today at $6.87. Taking a look at Apple, the big news this afternoon, Apple released its earnings today, and the stock had closed down just about $2 at $237 and change, has moved higher by more than $7 to $244 and change in after-hours trading. Apple's overall revenue rose by 4% in the first quarter, but missed on Wall Street iPhone sales expectations, and also saw sales in China drop 11.1%, according to the earnings report from Apple. Shares are moving up this afternoon after Apple gave a forecast for the March quarter that suggested revenue growth. Markets on pins and needles, it seems, regarding the possibility of an announcement later today on President Trump on tariffs. President Trump offered some new comments this afternoon about his threat to hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs, saying he will be announcing the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a number of reasons. He spoke in the Oval Office today. He said, number one is the people that have poured into our country so horribly and so much. Number two are the drugs, he said. And number three are the massive subsidies that we're giving to Canada and to Mexico in the form of deficits. The President said he's also considering excluding oil imports from the 25% tariffs he's threatened to impose on Mexico and Canada. The price of oil coming off its low point of the year today, right now hovering just above $73 a barrel at $73.09, up 36 cents. Shares of UPS, United Parcel Service, plunging today, down 14% after UPS issued weak revenue guidance for the year and said it planned to cut deliveries for Amazon, its biggest customer, by more than half, according to CNBC. The shipping giant said in its fourth quarter earnings report that it reached an agreement in principle with its largest customer, Amazon, to lower its volume by more than 50% by the second half of 2026. At the same time, UPS said it's reconfiguring the its U.S. network, and launching multi-year efficiency initiatives, which is expecting to result in savings of approximately $1 billion. The UPS CEO said on a call with investors that Amazon is the largest customer at UPS, but it is not the company's most profitable customer. She said its margin is very dilutive to the U.S. domestic business. We did see a UPS stock close down 14.1%. Checking the cryptos now, a wild ride this week. Bitcoin up about 200 at 105,119. Ethereum up 13 at 3,257. And Doge at 33 cents. And now the latest news here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. The massive recovery effort following the deadly and devastating firestorms here over the past couple of weeks in Los Angeles is underway. It looks like Los Angeles is poised to farm out the task of overseeing the rebuilding of more than 5,500 homes burned to the ground in Pacific Palisades. Mayor Bass and Steve Soboroff, who's been named the recovery czar by Mayor Bass, announced the plan to hire an outside consultant to manage a significant rebuilding contract to get the job done, according to various sources. Also looks like low-income housing will be part of the rebuilding of the Palisades. We're told now that a law on the books in L.A. specifies that. Following all of these developments very, very closely is Jerry Sullivan, the senior national managing editor at The Real Deal commercial real estate news source. Jerry Sullivan, thank you very much for joining us live here now.
It's my pleasure, Frank.
Certainly a lot to unpack here, but give us the latest news on what's happening in the Palisades as well as in Altadena and the other areas impacted by the firestorms.
Yeah, a couple interesting things just lately. I think you referred to one with essentially it seems like an outsourcing of the oversight of the rebuild. I just have a feeling as that settles in and gets to be considered broadly, I think there's going to be some questions asked and about that, and I think there's going to be some concerns raised about that. It seems like whoever they hire, and I would imagine that's a short list of outfits that could even qualify for that sort of job, is going to have enormous authority. They talked about being in charge of or having say over damage assessment and air and water quality. Well, you and I know in California, with those two things, you pretty much control the whole show. Nothing's going to go forward unless you give the okay on those things. And so it's an enormous amount of power that this position will have, and also a bit of a buffer, I think, between the elected officials and the facts on the ground. And you start to wonder, okay, why do we pay the city and county staffs that we pay if we have to essentially outsource this job?
Steve Soboroff, a name familiar to you, certainly in the commercial real estate world. It should be noted that Steve Soboroff himself ran for mayor about 25 years ago, I believe it was, and also spearheaded the Playa Vista project. Is there talk that the Palisades might look like Playa Vista ultimately?
I don't know. That's going to get very interesting. Let's not forget that the vast majority of the homes that were lost were privately owned single-family homes. Now, I know that a lot of people would like to see high density and affordable development there. I understand that. But there are some property rights involved here, at least with if folks are going to retain those lots and not sell them, or I don't know. Does the city plan to condemn them and seize them through eminent domain? Because some of the some of the broader plans I've heard discussed would almost require that.
And it's been reported now that Los Angeles, there's a law in the books in Los Angeles that could require the Palisades to include so-called affordable housing to replace older buildings, and for new buildings where owners cannot definitively prove that their rental apartments had no low-income renters in the past 5 years. The new resident protections ordinance taking effect soon requires that in so-called higher opportunity areas and moderate opportunity areas, units deemed or presumed to be occupied by persons or families above the lower income category shall be replaced with low income units. So we're watching this play out. What do we need to know about that?
Well, and we're going to find out and tell you through our reporting, I guarantee you. And there is a lot to sort out. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and just a lot to sort out with these laws and ordinances, whatever the case may be. Sometimes we hear about an ordinance and it's actually not quite that. It's actually a rule or regulation without the force of law. And so all of that remains to be sorted out and over a couple jurisdictions. But I do think, Frank, you're starting to see a potential dividing line here in county territory. They just had a meeting the other day. We had an item about this on our website with the county supervisors. And again, it was that one side favoring, we have a blank slate now, I guess, and let's add density, and another side opposed to that, not wanting to change the character of what was once and they hope will again be their neighborhood. And that's going to say a lot about the future of Los Angeles and how development is directed and how, not just this rebuild, but things going forward. I see, this shaping up into a couple very different camps, schools of thought, movements, you might even call it. And I do believe that this is going to play out and get very contentious before all is said and done.
On the air live with Jerry Sullivan, Senior National Managing Editor at The Real Deal real estate news site, and does a great job, authoritative job on commercial as well as residential real estate. We see a lot of talk, certainly on the apartment side. One of the stories I know you're following is that landlords now are, some see a replay as the city tries to revive pandemic tenant rules on evictions and so forth. And also we see the Attorney General here in California hitting a second Southern California real estate agent with a price gouging charge. This has, of course, the homeless situation, by the way, has only gotten worse in all of this. And now with so many homes wiped out, people who are being displaced by this terrible fire disaster are looking for new homes or apartments. So what are you hearing on that front?
Well, one thing I think is important, and our coverage noted, was the proposal to institute a rent freeze and a moratorium, reinstate a moratorium, I guess, on evictions was a bit narrower than it sounds. And it would have applied to people whose livelihoods were affected by the fires. And so it was a limited effort, but I think landlords and I think they saw it as an open door on a return to what I would say they believed was an overuse of regulation in the pandemic, where, well after the pandemic had certainly peaked and dropped off, they were still living under the moratorium on evictions that, was designed for peak pandemic. And so I think it sent a chill through them, and they showed up and sort of loaned their voice against the proposal, which has been watered down a bit and sent back to committee. So that's where that sits now. But again, I think this is going to raise all sorts of opportunities. I think for some folks, an opportunity to maybe go ahead and institute those sorts of regulatory actions under the cover of emergency, and the other side pushing back. And I don't expect this to be the last of it.
In the meantime, a massive recovery effort. Certainly, the entire business community is mobilized to help those who've been impacted by all of this. We've been talking to the LA EDC, Stephen Chung, and Tracy Hernandez with BizFed, and Maria Salinas from the LA Chamber, as well as other groups in the San Gabriel Valley, which, of course, trying to help the folks there in the Altadena area and the Eaton fire. And one other interesting thing that's happened recently, those who are trying to protect their homes for future disasters, looks like people are buying private fire hydrants after this firestorm. I know you've been reporting on this as well. People learned some very, very hard lessons. Obviously, it was such a horrific firestorm out there, with people trying to fight the fire with garden hoses, and now people actually buying a private fire hydrants to protect their homes. And I know you have further details on that at the realdeal.com website, Jerry. As always, wish we had more time here, but thank you very much for taking the call here as we continue to follow the recovery very, very closely. That is Jerry Sullivan, Senior National Managing Editor at The Real Deal, therealdeal.com, which covers commercial real estate authoritatively. Jerry, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank, and we'll catch you next time.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, and we'll do that. And right now, let's get out to the freeways here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. The automotive world watching what's going to happen next, with President Trump offering some comments today about his threat to hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs. How this will impact the auto business remains to be seen. Looks like he is considering excluding oil imports from the 25% tariffs he's threatened to impose on Mexico and Canada. We might get some further details on this sometime this evening, we're told, from the White House. In the meantime, California regulators say Tesla has yet to apply for the needed permits to operate a commercial robo-taxi service. This is something that Elon Musk mentioned during the Tesla earnings call yesterday. He said Tesla planned to operate a robo-taxi service here in California this year. Following all these developments very closely is our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. Lauren, thanks very much for taking the call.
Well, thanks for having me back. Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's so much going on. We don't usually have this kind of news in the auto industry other than like car prices and deals. The last year has been berserk. First thing that's important to note is that Stellantis, which is Jeep, Ram, it's Chrysler, Dodge, as well as Fiat, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, they're really struggling. And we've covered this and discussed it in the past. But President Trump said, listen, if you're going to they shut down the Belvidere, Illinois plant, and they're going to move all the production for Gladiators and Ram trucks to Mexico. So he said, go ahead and do that. And there's a 25% tariff. Well, sure enough, they hired back. Super smart move. Tim Kuniskis, who is the performance guy to handle the Ram truck line. They're still looking for a CEO. I think I know who it is, but I want to wait for the announcement. But in the meantime, while they're trying to get someone to be their CEO, they've made an intelligent decision to reopen the Belvidere plant and to bring jobs back and to produce product here in the USA. It's going to be about 1,500 jobs, which is really good. They're UAW jobs. And that also is good for people that did work there. So they're going to produce the Jeep Cherokee SUV as well as the truck back in that plant that they had originally started at, and Dodge Durangos as well. They're going to expand their Detroit assembly facility because they're afraid about moving all that production to Canada. They were very upset with the UAW and the way they were treated, and they were ready to go to Canada and Mexico and potentially literally anywhere else. Well, President Trump's not going to let that happen. So that's one of the first moves we saw with this tariff threat, and that is actually good for jobs, but there's been others as well.
On there live with Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. The president made it clear he wants to bring manufacturing back to the United States. BMW, I know, has that big plant in the Carolinas, right? He wants to encourage that sort of thing here and try to pump up our manufacturing base. And what else might be on the horizon given the current administration's thinking?
Well, there's been a couple things going on. BMW has built their plant 30 years ago when the last time they were threatened with tariffs. So they've actually made some very smart moves. They produce all their SUVs. Every single SUV for BMW is produced here in the USA, even the ones that are diesel-powered that go to Europe. And they ship them out from here. So that plant is the number one employer of the state of South Carolina is BMW, and that's in Spartanburg. And I've been there, and it's quite an impressive facility, and it's growing every day. But we just heard yesterday that other companies, such as Volkswagen Group, who already produces product in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is talking about building Porsches and Audis here, which they have been building Audis in Mexico and Porsches only in Germany, but they sell a lot of Macans and a lot of Cayennes as well as 911s. And if they want to not get nailed with a tariff, because there's also another tariff that no one talks about, and if I can get a direct one-on-one with Sean Duffy or Lee Zeldin, there's something called the chicken tax, where they're building these trucks in other countries, disassembling them, like the mattress or the Sprinter vans that you see, delivery vans, disassembling them, putting them on pallets, shipping them to South Carolina, and then reassembling them. It's ridiculous. It increases the cost to consumers. That's some of the things that need to go away if you want people to start building product here.
That's very interesting. And last but not least, Elon Musk, who is always up front these days. He handled the earnings call yesterday for Tesla and talked about a commercial robo-taxi service here in California. What do we need to know about that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. He had a loss in sales. He had a loss overall. He's not had the growth that he thought. He's struggling in Germany as well as in China. But this guy is like the Pied Piper. He tells everyone we're going to see robo-taxis. There's a lot of issues that has to be put into play, but still the stock goes up, which makes no sense whatsoever. But the biggest factor is there's no government regulations in place as of today. And yes, he has President Trump's ear, so I want to see if they put these regulations in play that will include Sean Duffy, who is part of the Department of Transportation. I think that's a factor. We've got the insurance companies who don't want to insure this, nor the people that insure them, the reinsurance companies. That has to be resolved. The biggest issue beyond those two, which can be solved, is there is no firewall available today that is 100% on anything, whether it be the government, cars, your home, your personal devices, that would stop a hacker from accessing that information.
Terrific, Lauren. So much news, so little time. Thank you very much for that thorough update. As always, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast, live with me here on 790 KABC. Stay tuned now for the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang. I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here. Mottek On Money on 790 KABC.
Bravo TV star Lala Kent holds nothing back.
Like, I go into a full spiral.
Get to know the TV personality.
I talked about this with Teresa Giudice.
Remember when I pushed Andy Cohen?
Yes, it was iconic.
Okay.
The entrepreneur.
What are we manifesting in 2025?
And the mom.
Sosa is a dream baby. Your kids are older. It's
Bravo children.
the celebrity children of celebrity Bravo love.
Give them Lala. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.